Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. We're going to talk about DM James, we're going to talk about Strixhaven, and we're going to talk about Ad Hominem. All right, let's get into this. So Strixhaven came out, right? Months ago. I think it was late. Came out in late 2021. And it just blew up, man. But here's the thing: Strixhaven is a Dungeons & Dragons fifth edition book. You know where it blew up? It blew up on every single Dungeons & Dragons fifth edition D&D commentary, and it also blew up all over the OSR. Right? Every OSR commentator out there had to talk about Strixhaven. Right? Now, why? Because OSR doesn't have anything real. They don't have any draw. Right? They get a fraction of what even a moderate Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition commentator gets. And the reason why is, one, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is Gary Gygax's real legacy. He carries the game forward in every edition. When you see that fat red dragon ampersand, that's Gary all over, right? Everything about it, right? Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, right now, on the cover of its starter box coming up, is the comic book characters from, in my humble opinion, from the D&D Saturday morning cartoon. You could see it clear as day. Everybody knew it when they saw it. They're like, that's Gary. His legacy is all over Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, right? And because his radiance shines through Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, it draws everybody like a moth to a flame, right? And in addition to that, it's just, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is the real deal, it is the legacy, the inheritor of Gary Gygax's legacy, right? And his legacy always sits first and foremost on the current edition of Dungeons & Dragons, and Gary's legacy carries the game forward. That's all of it, right? And OSR doesn't have it. Their games are literally disconnected from Gary's legacy, right? So now DM James is a really interesting guy. I feel like he's an OSR commentator, and here's why. I think one of his primary games right now is Adventure of Conquer King. He talked about it for a long time, right? And he plays a lot of OSR, right? And primarily Adventure of Conquer King. So I consider him an OSR commentator, right? And the reason why I'm really fascinated with him is there's a lot of good reasons to watch his channel. So one, he's very smart, and he has a unique perspective, right? However, he is iconically an OSR template. He is a OSR icon, right? In that he represents, in my opinion, about 75% of the OSR. So what are they? One, they're Dungeons & Dragons Now resistant. They never want to play the current version of Dungeons & Dragons. Here's another one. But they never shut up about it, ever. They're constant. They have something to say about, they're like, I don't care about D&D now. I don't care about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Now let me talk to you for 20 minutes about D&D 5th edition. Right? It's always, I love it. It's so funny. And he's spot on, right? I really hate D&D 5th edition. Now let me talk to you about D&D 5th edition. This represents the OSR, right? And I think I wouldn't really have any beef with the OSR if they went their own way, but they don't. They never shut up about the current D&D now, right? It's never, right? So here's, let me get to where we're at, okay? So DM James, DM James squawks about Strixhaven, right? He's not running it. I don't think he even read it or bought it, right? But he had so much to say about it. So he goes off and squawks on his channel about Strixhaven. I come in and just do point for point and you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And I know you're wrong because I read it and I bought it, right? So my informed opinion is going to, essentially very much trump your ignorance, right? So let's get into this, right? And so I just did a commentary on his commentary of Strixhaven. And the reason why I take the time to do this is another thing that's very iconic about DM James. I think he's representative of 75% of the OSR. So when you watch him, you're getting a really good representation of the 75% of the OSR, in my humble opinion, right? Very resistant to change, never want to be on the current one, very curmudgeonly, all this. But then here's the kicker, right? Here's why I don't ignore DM James, right? He's one of these classic guys who ran Dungeons & Dragons and ran it for decades, and in older editions, and has a bunch of brilliance that needs to get moved over into Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Dungeon Masters. I'm sorry to say this, quite literally before he dies, right? He's got a ton of experience that I want to transfer over to D&D 5th edition players so that they know how to run games, how to make games compelling in the new version that contains Gary's legacy, doesn't ignore it, right? Like here's a great way to, like, if you want to ignore a great way to ignore Gary's legacy is like play a crusty, dusty old black and white game that you can't draw players to, and just let Gary's legacy die by curmudgeonly holding on to very culturally problematic editions of the game, which is exactly what DM James wants to do, right? But I wouldn't worry about it, but we need that wisdom pulled over quite literally before he dies. And me saying that he could die soon is not an exaggeration. He talks about players of his own that are his age and more dying, right? Like, we got a clock on this. We need to get these guys into D&D 5th edition games as players, as dungeon masters, and we need to get over the obstacles so we can bring all this treasure. It's literally getting the treasure out of the dungeon before the dungeon floods, right? Like, that's what we're doing, right? That's what I'm trying to do, right? All right, so here's where all this lands, right? So DM James, so he does a Strixhaven. I do a response to his Strixhaven, and then he sees my response to his Strixhaven content months afterwards. No problem. That's fine. I'm coming up on 3,000 videos on this channel, right? Since I started almost a decade ago, right? So I do tons of commentary. No problem that he didn't see it right away. That's no problem. So he just recently did a response to my response, right? And so he gets into it, and he goes point by point on my content, right? I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with two things he says, and I want to talk about it, and I want to warn you about it, okay? All right, so here's what he says, right? So one, he did go point by point on my content, but he didn't stop there, right? One, that's exactly what I want. I want other OSR commentators, D&D 5e commentators, to look at my content and deal and then go at point of contention, point for point with my content, with what I believe, with my supposition, with what I'm saying, not with me as a person. And that's where DM James didn't stop, right? So he said, Scott, you think that Dungeons & Dragons is about expansion and not escapism. You're wrong, and you need mental health help. Nice. Okay. It's not nice. Let me not be sarcastic. Sarcastic don't play on the internet. Let's get all the way there. He's saying, your opinion of Dungeons & Dragons is different than my opinion. See it all the way through. What he's really saying is, you're mentally unsound because you don't believe what I believe about Dungeons & Dragons. You're mentally unsound. Here we go, right? And then the next thing he says is, he's like, I don't believe that Scott Garibay believes what he's saying. It's a parody. It's a shtick. It's a persona. He says all three of them in the video. And what he's really saying is, he's like, no one can listen to Scott Garibay about anything because he's two things. He's mentally unsound and he's not genuine, right? Now, if you believe what DM James says, that I'm not genuine and I'm not mentally sound, you should not listen to this channel, okay? I highly encourage you not to listen to this channel. And the reason why I say that is I don't want to lose subscribers, right? But I can't tell you in good faith to listen to anyone who is not mentally sound and not genuine, right? There is no point in that, right? You are putting gas on a fire, right? And so the reality is, and now why is DM James doing this? Why is he saying, don't listen to Scott? He's mentally unsound, right? And he's not genuine. He doesn't believe what he's saying, right? And the reason why is it's easy and it's classic and it's old. Everything that DM James likes. The reason he doesn't play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is it's uncomfortable. He would need to learn new language. He would need to learn new cultural progressive concepts, right? He needs to literally learn new rules because there's a bunch of new rules in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, despite what he says, right? And he's like, oh, why should I do anything hard? Why don't I just go back to my old versions and do the same thing I did in 1984? That way I don't have to change, I don't have to grow, I don't have to improve, right? I get to stay small. D&D gets to stay small. and by extension, anybody who listens to him stays small, and he encourages them to stay small, to never improve, to never go beyond escapism. Just use the game to make yourself happy until you die and fall off this earth, right? Don't use Dungeons & Dragons to improve. Don't expand yourself. Don't expand your mind. Don't expand anything, right? So DM James is not saying that I'm mentally unsound and not genuine out of malice. He's doing it out of laziness, and he doesn't even know it, right? He plays copy games of D&D. He plays D&D because he doesn't want to do anything hard, right? And guess what's the easiest thing in the world? Ad hominem attack, right? Don't take the content at the contentious point, right? Just chop the tree down at the stump and tell everybody, don't listen to anything this person says. They're mentally unsound and they're not genuine, right? So don't make me do the hard thing of taking each point by point and engaging it on the point. Let me just make sure that everybody knows this person is a bad person, right? And I do think that is correct. I think he is saying people who are mentally unsound and non-genuine are bad. I think he takes a long way around, right? But in my humble opinion, he's saying you're mentally unsound, you're not genuine, you're a liar, you're lying, you don't actually believe what you're mentally unsound and you're a liar, you're a bad person. It's the oldest, saddest, most ridiculous trick in the book, ad hominem. Don't engage with the content, engage with the creator, right? And just tear the creator down, and that way you could say, I don't need to listen to that person. And he's quite frankly saying to everybody else, don't listen to this person. It's ad hominem, it's lazy, right? And that's exactly what DM James is. He's intellectually lazy, right? Very smart guy. And what makes me truly sad, and the only reason I continue to engage with these OSR people, is there's brilliance there, right? There is a huge amount of value there, right? And that's the difference between me and DM James, right? I'm going to tell you, go over, check out his channel. He's a brilliant guy. He believes what he says, right? But when he engages with me, he's like, this person's mentally unsound. They're a liar. What he's really saying is, that's a bad person. Don't listen to him. Which is really shocking, because actually those are tactics of massive liberals who try to silence people, which is ironically what he's doing, right? And again, that's another issue, is he's highly self-unaware. He doesn't even know he's doing it, right? I don't think he did any of this out of malice, right? He's literally ignorant and lazy. He's ignorant of what he's doing, and he's lazy in his debate, right? Intellectually lazy, and at this point in his career. But I'll tell you right now, that dude was a mover and a shaker at one point. I know there's a brilliant dungeon master in there, and I desperately want to get these guys over for 1, 10, 100 more sessions in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, so we can literally bring out the treasure from these old grognard dungeon masters who know a ton about narrative, who know a ton about running incredibly brilliant games, right? But I am incredibly frustrated with his review, right? Rather than just dealing with his content, he's like, Scott Garabay's a bad person. I'm gonna ignore him, and you can ignore him, right? And it's frustrating. And I will say this: he did invite me to go on and talk. I don't want to go on and talk. And the reason why is he is saying incredibly repugnant things about me. He's saying no one should listen to you because you're mentally unsound and you're a liar. And that, when I engage with, I wouldn't give, if there's somebody on the internet who's mentally unsound and a liar, I'm not even going to take the time to respond to them, right? Because their content isn't worth engaging with. And that's what he's saying. He's saying that people should engage with. And that's incredibly disappointing, right? And one more reason why I'm on here telling you this is I have an incredibly unique view of Dungeons & Dragons. DM James does not. He has a very templated view of Dungeons & Dragons. You could spin around on YouTube and hit any other OSR in the head with a foam rock, and you're going to get the same opinions, right? Or half of them. And the reality is, I just want you to know, if you have an incredibly unique view, if you're out there doing something truly different than other people, it will frighten them, right? And they will attack you personally. It's a cost. It's the cost of Dungeons and Dragons commentary. I wish this cost wasn't so high. It is very frustrating to me, right? And I just want to encourage you, do not be afraid. Do not back down. And do not ever let ignorant, lazy people, right, who can be brilliant, right, but just are choosing not to, right, do not ever let them stop you. That's my opinion. What's yours? Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.